So listening reflectively is an expression of empathy, which was defined by Rogers all those years ago as accurate understanding of the client or patient's experience, as if from the internal frame of reference. My effort not to look at the person from the outside and talk about them, but to try to imagine myself into their world, into their experience, and say what it is that I see, so to speak, as I imagine myself there, doing so without any sort of judgment, again, sustaining a feeling of safety. The reason why we use reflective listening, some of you may be familiar with Thomas Gordon's early work on working with parents and children, his model of communication, which is simple but quite evocative, I think. What Gordon said was, when we communicate, the first thing that happens is we have a thought. There's something we want to communicate. We have to put that thought into words and actually express it to another person. Then the listener has to actually receive it. They have to be able to hear and take in what we're saying. And then they have to interpret or understand what they've heard. And Gordon's point was that there are many opportunities for misunderstanding or inadequate understanding at these different points along the way. My thought, what I think, I may not really say it the way I meant it. What I say may not actually be heard by the person who's listening, because maybe they're not fully listening or they misheard me. And even if they heard me accurately, what they think I meant, the words that I intended, may be different from what they understand. So the only way to know whether what I've understood matches what the other person meant or thought, is by reflecting it back to them, by checking my understanding with them, of them, by sharing my understanding so that they can let me know whether I've understood, if I have understood partially, what else or what more they meant, and thus continuing around that cycle. And so we express empathy through reflective listening, what Rogers originally called reflective listening. In MI, we distinguish between different levels or types of reflection. We can simply restate or repeat or slightly rephrase what the person has said. This is often what is taught as active listening, but any of you who've ever done this knows, and especially in family therapy, this has been taught in certain forms of marital and family therapy, that this gets old very quickly. That the fact that I can parrot back what you said to me does not typically, past once or twice, tell me very much about how well you've understood me. So a little of this goes a long way, although there will be times, particularly when we're under pressure as a practitioner, where a simple restatement can be the most appropriate and effective reflective listening response. If I'm feeling uncertain about what to say next, the client is upset, angry, I'm confused, simply restating what the client has said is always a safe response. It tells the client, I've heard them, and it invites the client to say more. Of course, I can also paraphrase, so I'm reflecting the content of what the person has said, but I'm using different words so that the client feels more like I'm actually hearing them. Both of these are forms of what we call simple reflection. They focus on the explicit content of what the client has said. And what they convey best to the client is that I'm listening. I've heard you, which is a very important thing to communicate, especially right at the beginning of a conversation, a therapeutic or other conversation. The other forms of reflective listening go further, reflecting the meaning, something the person means but hasn't actually said in so many words, but only implied, or reflecting a feeling that the person has, but hasn't put into words. And we call this complex reflection. Complex reflection reflects or expresses implicit content rather than only the explicit content of what the person said. And because it does that, it goes beyond giving the person we're talking to the feeling that they were listening and helps them actually feel that we're understanding them.